have the great pleasure to host Alexandre Solomon. He's a managing partner for Genesis Network GmbH, a blockchain consulting practice.
Hi, Philippe. Thanks for inviting me.
Just for the full disclosure for our viewers and auditors, you're an old friend of mine in beautiful Switzerland, and you were already telling me, blockchain. I have to admit at that time, this did not really make too much sense for me. Just before this, where could I put my money? Where could I invest? Auditors, if you have any questions in this regard, this is absolutely not what we're going to be doing today. We do not provide any financial investment advice, just for the little disclaimer.
One thing that everyone should invest in is in learning and spending time to understand this tech, because that is probably one of the most valuable things that you can do in this space.
I love what you're saying. I really love it. Yeah, I fully agree. Important thing before we start, how is your beautiful little dog, Ollie, doing?
Yeah, Ollie's great.
So say hello, Ollie. He's probably one of the most beautiful, cute, and clever Maltese dogs I've ever met. He enjoys being on the standard paddle every day on the lake, so that's cool. If we jump directly into our topic for today, you are a former exec for one of the largest global software companies in the world. You've worked for them for 20 years. You couldn't get another job than that? You only had one job in your life?
Yeah, I spent my career with one company, as you know, at Microsoft. And I would say it's without a doubt one of the best experiences of my life. I got to live and work across several continents. I think I had some of the most interesting roles that you could have in tech. I started out in the US and later went on to Asia Pacific and led marketing there, returned back to Europe and worked for the Western European headquarters to lead marketing operations, and then finally ended up within the Microsoft's cloud marketing team, the Azure team. Then I finally decided to leave at the end of 2020.
So why did you decide to leave such a company after 20 years and move on? What was the trigger for you?
I get that question, especially because I left at the end of 2020, just in the middle of a pandemic. And I remember people asking me that same question when I finally made the decision. It really sort of started back in 2016 when I had first begun to hear about Ethereum. Bitcoin, I sort of missed from the standpoint that I never really took the time to understand it and just sort of ignored it. I paid superficial attention to it. But it wasn't until I created my first wallet with Ethereum, acquired some Ether, which is the main currency of that blockchain, and started sending it to people. And I realized immediately that this was going to change the world. The fact that you could send value to someone or an app without any permission, without the need for an email address, without the need for a bank or any intermediaries, it just completely pulled me into the rabbit hole.
Oh, I remember when you were at that time. It was a real passion. We could speak between hours and hours about the topic.
Yeah, I'm surprised we're still friends, Philippe.
Well, I got convinced. That's why we also did these beautiful projects together on the blockchain, because for me, it was very interesting. I like to believe our team is quite innovative, but it was more the metaverse, the virtual. But I think I missed the early days of the blockchain, probably because it was too theoretical in a way. I had some issues to grasp it very initially, while the metaverse, the virtual, is very visual, or the web at the beginning. It was much easier for me to understand. And about the web, we hear a lot about Web3 these days. There was Web 1, Web 2. What is this Web3? How does it relate to blockchain?
To just touch on the last point, I think you're right. I mean, early days, it was more of a private club. It was a little bit exclusive because it was so obscure that just not that many people took the time to really understand it. You had this community of people that sort of got it, that understood what this weird tech could do. And there were lots of strange, incredibly intelligent, weird people. And it was just an interesting place to be.
It's a very geeky environment, right?
Yeah, it's getting less so because it's starting to be a little bit more like the mid-2000s of the internet, where things are becoming more intuitive and easier to use. But in the early days, you had to do some very crazy things to create paper wallets. And the OPSEC, you had to observe to be absolutely sure that you weren't going to lose your funds. It was a bit crazy, but it was fun as well. And it was a good way to really learn the fundamentals.
About the fundamentals, what is Web3 basically?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting term. Web 1 is really the period of kind of mid to late 90s when the internet first came out. It was not referred to as Web 1. That's just something we sort of retroactively refer to that period of time when the web was in its infancy. But these were the early days. And really, it was mostly about content publishing. creating static websites. So you can think of Web 1 as the read-only website. Essentially, it was there to push information out. There just wasn't much more you could do with it. But that was a first start.
So basically the Web 1, it was companies putting their product catalogs online, all the yellow pages to find the right phone numbers for the older ones who remember that. That was the first phase, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Just information being published out. There were adverts and then it wasn't until Web 2 where it was a pretty considerable breakthrough, because this was really what we refer to as the social web. It was really Facebook and the introduction of other social sites. And these were the early Web 2 app services. And you could do more than publish. Now, all of a sudden, you could interact. And that was a breakthrough. Eventually, you could buy things. You could do your online banking. So Web 2, it was not just about reading, it was about writing. So we say Web 2 is read-write. So Web 1 is read, Web 2 is read-write. And now we get to Web 3. And Web 3 is really kind of a game changer because it gives you the ability to reclaim control of your data. It really democratizes your online experience. So you can think of it as an entirely new internet layer. It is built on the internet, but it's an entirely new layer that unlocks new models of governance, ways that we participate with brands, and ownership, which is a pretty big deal. So it's about decentralized blockchains and user-controlled digital property.
Can we say, for example, if Web3, we handed over the property of what we were doing, the messages, to big techs like Facebook, etc. In Web3, we are reclaiming the ownership of our digital activities.
That's exactly right. I call that user-controlled digital property, and user-controlled is the operative word. That's the breakthrough. It allows you to now reward users and customers for their attention in ways that you just couldn't do before. As you said, you actually own digital stuff. This is why we sometimes refer to Web3 as the ownership economy or the internet of value. They're really the key building blocks for this layer to open permissionless blockchains and smart contracts and the tokens.
These are already some complex things. I propose that we talk about these smart contracts later. I can see you're ready to go into that. But before we go into even more in details, I think Web3, it's our digital ownership for the users themselves. But why we need a blockchain? Can you give some specific details, challenges it really solves? Why do we need that thing, actually?
To be clear, so Web3 doesn't specifically refer to blockchains, although they are part of it, but more generally to the entire set of building blocks and app services that are being created in this new type of financial plumbing. So there are parts of Web3, and yes, blockchain is a really key part of it, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And we will need this native plumbing in order to power these new types of economies that are being created. It's a big change from the way we did these sort of things. To answer your question, do we even need a blockchain for that? Most of the time, I have to say the answer is probably no, because they do solve very specific problems. But first, maybe we can talk a little bit about what blockchains don't do, or maybe why we shouldn't use them, because there are times where it really just doesn't make sense to use a blockchain. First of all, they're very, very slow. Not only are they slow, but they're expensive. They can cost thousands of more times than using traditional databases such as MySQL or any other centralized data storage you might be using, AWS, Azure. So you might ask why we would want to put anything on a blockchain if they're slow and expensive.
Alex, that's already very interesting. So basically here you're opposing or comparing the blockchain to databases. So that's the storing system, the blockchain. That's how you see it.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's what the blockchain really does. Is it is a database. It's a ledger. You can think of it as an Excel file. The difference is how we ensure the historical changes, the ownership, all of the transactions. That's really all the things that the blockchain stores done very differently than you would for central storage or central cloud services. The original question was, what are blockchains good at, or what then can we use a blockchain for if we know that we don't need super high speed and super low cost? Because obviously those are things that you already can do very, very well, and that's fine. So they're good. As I mentioned, one of the things that open public blockchains are very, very good at are preserving history and guaranteeing immutability. Now, these are two things you do not hear is asking for when you are looking to use cloud services, database services, because you're paying an intermediary to do that. And you have to trust that that intermediary is going to store your history for you, and do the best job that they possibly can within their ability to guarantee immutability. Some can do it better than others, but there's no absolute guarantee. So there's a big difference between open public blockchains and private chains, consortium chains, even CBDC chains. These are central bank privately controlled chains. They operate like central databases. They're really not blockchains that operate like public chains.
So basically what these CBDCs use is the same technology as the blockchain. Sometimes these are copies of that, but they apply this to their own needs and they keep the control of them. That's where you see the difference between.
Yeah, so specifically, that's a central bank chain because most blockchains are open source. You can fork them, you can copy them, you can use them. But then what they do is they rip out the consensus mechanism. We talked before about preserving history and immutability. There are several things that give you the ability to do that. And I can talk about that as we get a little bit deeper into the discussion. But essentially, they don't want that. They rip the consensus mechanism out and they plug their own in. And their consensus mechanism is what we call proof of authority. That's just essentially one or more individuals or entities who control that database. And they basically have the right to control the history. So that means you can ensure that it's correct. You can rewrite it. You can decide which transactions you want to accept. And that's an important characteristic for a central bank chain. They want that control. Back to the question of what blockchains are good at. My experience is really working on EVM, so Ethereum virtual machine chains like Ethereum. Ethereum was the first one. There are others as well, but they operate in the same way. And essentially, they have an ability to maintain these historical records in a way that they cannot be changed. And that's really what we mean by immutability. And that's a super important trait because that essentially gives you the ability to make trustless transactions where you don't have counterparty risk because you're not relying on an intermediary or a third party to preserve that data for you. And equally important is the security of the network, right? And just guaranteeing access to the data itself. So if you think about it, any sort of central service you use, there can be reasons why you can be prevented from accessing those services. And there can be many reasons for that. One can be geography, can also be governments may not want you to do certain things. Maybe you're operating with countries or individuals that are on a sanctions list, and so you can be prevented. So these are critical functions. If you're using central storage services, then you get speed and you get low cost, but you have heavy counterparty risk. And so these are some of the things you start to think about as you're deciding whether you need to store information on a blockchain.
So basically, if you have these private databases, what you're saying that the companies hosting or providing these services can basically decide everything they want. I mean, with some rules, of course, but they can decide if you have access or not access anymore. It's connected to the banking system. While the blockchain, if I say this for the layman, it's some kind of a very open database with a whole bunch of validators around the world who have to agree on each transaction. And then there's nobody who can really impose a restriction on you. So it's a database that runs all the time during the day, during the night, everywhere in the world. And you can do the operations you want.
That's exactly right. So maybe let me just quickly summarize. There's two types of data that are interesting enough and maybe important enough that you'd want to consider storing them on a blockchain. The first one is transaction data. So if you think about that, it's hugely important. Your bank currently does that for you. They have redundancies. If you wanted to actually do this without an intermediary and ensure that nobody could change the data, then conducting your transactions on a blockchain is a good idea because there the history will be maintained in perpetuity. And I'll talk about that in a minute to answer the last question.
So what you're saying here, Alex, basically with a blockchain, you don't need banks anymore. Is that what you're saying?
Well, banks in their current form, right, in terms of just providing basic sort of account information, you could argue that you can easily create your own wallet. You can plug into a lot of the decentralized finance and a lot of the different financial mechanisms to essentially get what you're getting today from your bank. The difference is that because the tech is still new, it's still not widely accepted. But I think there will be a day where people won't be looking to cash in and out necessarily of Bitcoin or Ethereum, because these will be currencies that could be used and widely accepted. And so you won't be using exchanges so much anymore. You'll just be holding on to these coins and using them for your transactions. And this is essentially today what a bank does. I think that's a very a strong potential of that happening.
What kind of reaction do you see from banks? Because what you're saying, basically, that's a big threat to banks. So how are they reacting these days about that?
It depends. You have banks that are actually pretty open to this stuff, pretty progressive, that have one leg in the old world and one leg in the new world. And so they're offering things like exchange services, OTC services. These are over-the-counter services for the purchase of cryptocurrencies, purchase and sales. Banks understand the value, and I think they see the future. They also understand that one day, most of these traditional financial instruments will be tokenized and they'll be traded on open public blockchains. And so learning how to do this now probably makes sense. But I think for the very, very large banks that really, see this purely as competition, they don't really want to spend the time to figure out what sort of value-added services they can offer on top of this. And certainly there are a lot of things from custody to all sorts of services you could potentially provide. I think, for them, they just see it as a threat. At the end, we can talk a little bit about the regulatory aspects. And I think this is why you're starting to see now, all of a sudden, crypto went from a few hundred million to a few $100 billion to a $2 trillion market cap. And it's corrected again.
This is huge, actually. Are you speaking just about the Ethereum network or Bitcoin?
No, that's all crypto, but it's sizable. And I think finally it's on the radar. But first, they sort of laughed at it. It was weird internet money. It was used on the dark web in the early days, as was the internet and mobile phones and a lot of other early tech. Then it grew, and all of a sudden, once you reach $1 trillion, it becomes something. You're on the radar. And I think that's where all of a sudden now you have the banks and the financial institutions with a growth mindset that kind of want to innovate, are looking at what they can do with this stuff to build on it and offer services to customers. And the ones that are trying to push back and kind of protect themselves are trying to regulate the crypto industry.
From what you're saying, it's really clear that blockchain is not just a fad. It's not something that just here for a little while, everybody speaks about it and disappears in a few years from now.
No, I don't think so. Chains like Ethereum will serve as global financial settlement layers in the future. When I would ask people over the last few years, how much do you think the internet has transacted since its inception in the 90s? You get all sorts of answers back, like billions, trillions. But actually, until Bitcoin, it was zero. The internet transacted nothing. What the internet did is simply take a message, a request for a transaction, and send it usually to a mainframe at a bank. And then they had some ways, in some cases, to automate those responses and fulfill those orders, and in other cases not. But now you have these public ledgers that can do native transaction settlement, and that's huge.
Someone coined the term the internet of value. That's what you're referring to. That's the blockchain, basically, where the value is not in the old system or the legacy systems from the banks and central banks, but it actually sits on the internet. It is there natively.
That's right. Bitcoin, Ethereum, they're very different types of blockchains, but essentially that would meet the requirement of Internet of Value. And of course, depending on who you ask, you get different definitions, but obviously it has to be able to store value. You need to be able to use it as a denominator. There are a number of things, and probably the old school economic definitions of these things are probably not valid anymore. Because I think in the end, anything that someone accepts as an instrument of value is money in the end. It's the markets that will have determined. But yeah, that's right. They're native. If you look specifically at Ethereum and some of the other copies of Ethereum, the EVM public chains, these are open source, open access, general purpose smart contract chains. When we talk about the Internet of Value or this sort of thing, we're generally speaking about these types of blockchains. And you can think of it as a cloud service that anyone can use and participate in.
What you're saying just now is fascinating to me. I mean, for the ones who are in tech and IT, you know that you have a lot of open source code that you can just code something, put it online, and others can take and change it. And that's what you were saying about Ethereum, for example. You can take a copy of it if you want it and implement it for your own needs. For me, this is really a big game changer. That's why you have different types of blockchains now. You said there's Ethereum, there's Bitcoin, and many others. So how are they different? How is, for example, Ethereum different from Bitcoin?
With respect to open source, and it has, right? So Ethereum's been copied many times. You had private companies like JP Morgan that took the code and created their own version with a different consensus mechanism, and they call it quorum. What makes it different from Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin was the first. Bitcoin was created by Satoshi Nakamoto. This is an individual or a group of people that no one really knows who it is or who they are. I mean, you don't need to know who it is. The code is open. Bitcoin is open source. You can verify everything. But Bitcoin was a project that really was designed to be used as digital cash. I think today it's considered more digital gold, more of a store of value. I mean, anybody that I know who has Bitcoin doesn't want to spend their Bitcoin. They just want to hold it. Whether you call it digital cash or digital gold, I think that's accurate. But you can't really do anything on top of it. It's not a smart contract chain. It's not a general purpose Turing complete compute environment. It's very simple. It works like an old 4-function calculator. You can send transactions and verify them, and that's about it.
So Bitcoin, for example, if you had summarized it, it's a digital gold, right?
Yes, exactly.
And Ethereum is much more than this then.
Ethereum, it's an open public chain. There's a couple things to understand. Some of these things are true across both Bitcoin and Ethereum. Some are more specific to Ethereum, but essentially it's an open contract chain that anyone can have access to. And it works with this notion of distributed consensus. Open source means that the code is available for anyone to audit, to verify, to copy, to use. Distributed consensus means that it's open to anyone to participate in. So you or me, anyone can participate by validating, by mining, or developing on the technology. So that's a really important difference between an open and open source project like Ethereum and closed source projects or services. The second thing is that you've got different types of consensus, and we won't talk about that today because it takes a bit of time, but essentially consensus is just the way that the chain preserves the history. And Ethereum uses a consensus mechanism called proof of stake. That's a big difference between Ethereum and Bitcoin. Bitcoin uses proof of work.
Proof of work is a very, very high energy consumption system, right? That's what Ethereum replaced in September this year, in 2022.
That's exactly right. It just got upgraded. The proof of work mining went away. And by the way, for Bitcoin, it's roughly between 125 and 150 terawatt hours per year. That is huge. I still contend that it's a fairly efficient conversion of electricity directly into network security. A lot of people don't agree with that. But nonetheless, we have a better and a much more efficient consensus mechanism. In fact, it's 99.9% more energy efficient than Bitcoin.
That change happened just a month ago, right? Where Ethereum said we're going to move from proof of work to proof of stake exactly for one of these reasons, which is saving energy.
Yeah, so that wasn't the main reason that Ethereum went through what was called the merge, which was merging the old database, the old ledger, into the new beacon chain to become what Ethereum is today, which is this proof of stake network. But that is one of the benefits. That is absolutely one of the side benefits. It's more secure as well. There are a number of benefits that you get by doing this. And obviously, reducing energy consumption is a huge one.
Back to the difference between Ethereum and Bitcoin. You said Bitcoin is basically digital gold. And Ethereum, we can do much more things on there. We can actually create even financial services. We can create incentive programs. So it's basically a big ledger, a big database, open around the whole world, accessible at any time, where everybody can create their own logic to it that we call smart contracts. Is that a fair summary of it?
Yeah, it's an open platform. I've created a couple of my own apps. When I was learning, originally created a little app called Smart Purser, which was designed as a cost sharing app. Anybody can do that. You can write an app. The native language is Solidity, but it's very similar to JavaScript. So if you've done any of that, it's quite similar. And instead of hosting it on a traditional web hosting service, you can push the app to the chain, to the execution environment, and then it's available to anyone.
So basically, this system of apps that you're referring to, these smart contracts, this is something you can do. You can develop apps for Ethereum, but you cannot develop apps for Bitcoin.
Yes, you can develop apps directly on top of Ethereum that interact with Ethereum itself, with the virtual machine. Bitcoin is different. You can develop apps outside of the blockchain, outside of Bitcoin, that interact with Bitcoin to accept it as a form of currency, but you cannot host a smart contract on Bitcoin itself. It is not a smart contract chain. All it can do is essentially send Bitcoins from Ted to Alice, and that's it. It can do a few other things. It has some other features. It allows you to have multi-sig wallets and a few things like that. But for all practical purposes, you can think of it as just a way to send funds back and forth. That's really all it can do.
So when we speak about tokens and NFTs, this is on the Ethereum chain, not on the Bitcoin.
Bitcoin is a network, and it's a coin. It's a lot of things. So technically, Bitcoin is its own token. But yes, the biggest difference for Ethereum is that first you have the native coin of Ethereum. You can think of that as the base coin. Well, you can build on top of this network. You can build different types of coins that we call tokens. And there's different standards for those tokens. It's really the beauty of a smart contract chain. It's hugely different than the very simple transaction processing that Bitcoin can do. This really allows you to create your own digital currency on top of Ethereum, and you can control all of the financial aspects and logic of that coin.
And actually, together, we did create our own tokens and NFTs, our own currency, whatever the value might be. That was a very interesting process. Back to the tokens and NFTs. NFTs are what you call non-fungible tokens. What does that mean?
There are several different classifications of tokens, and there's hybrid classifications too. But to keep things simple, you can think of tokens in two different categories. One is fungible and one is non-fungible. A fungible token is really like a coin. You can think of money as fungible because €1 is equal to another euro. 1 Swiss franc is equal to another Swiss franc. It doesn't matter which one you have because they're completely interchangeable within the currency. Whether you have a 5 Swiss franc coin or 5 single coins, they're all interchangeable, and the government requires that those be accepted. It does not matter which ones you have or where they came from. So fungibility is a really critical piece of what makes sort of digital money work on the internet. Non-fungible means that these are kind of unique. Non-fungible can represent assets and anything you want. They're not interchangeable. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have value and that they can't be sold. And you are seeing all sorts of really interesting things happen today where even NFTs are used as reserve currency. So some NFTs are so valuable that they can actually be used as collateral to provide liquidity, which is incredible. Some NFTs are sort of quasi-fungible in that sense because they have value and you can sell them. They're not as liquid as fungible tokens, but they can still have value. So that's the key difference. Fungible, they can be exchanged. They're all the same. Non-fungible, each asset has a unique identifier and there are no two alike.
If I try to make a parallel to the physical world, tokens could be coins, francs, euros, dollars, and the NFTs could be some piece of art, for example.
It could be a piece of art. It could be diamonds. It could be jewelry. There's no two diamonds alike. It could be that you have a diamond that has a particular value and a particular identity. It's not really liquid, right? Because you need to take some steps in order to sell it, but it's worth something and you could. So yeah, it's right. It could be art. It could be like jewelry in the real world. It could be even a deed to your home. It could be a non-fungible token. It's unique. It's not necessarily liquid, but it has value.
This seems to open a whole new world because digital was for many years the opposite of ownership world. You know, you could copy films, you could copy anything you want on the internet. As long as it was digital, you could just get a copy of it. So what is this digital ownership now? Why is it so different?
Couldn't you already do this? You've got points, you've got credits, right? You play games. It appears as though you sort of own stuff within those games. Interestingly, the reason that Ethereum was created in the first place was unhappiness because a company that ran a particular online game changed their rules. The founder either lost some of his credits or his points or some of his in-game items, and he was not happy about that these rules could just be changed arbitrarily. You're young, you play these games, you put a lot of time and maybe a lot of money. So the idea is that you have assets that you control, and it could be in a game, it could be in a lot of different things, but the difference is that you have a special key and a special wallet that gives you control over those assets, and nobody can take those away from you.
That is a very big difference. We also hear that Ethereum and Bitcoin are non-ESG friendly because they use an enormous amount of energy. Is this still correct? And what does that actually mean?
I guess it depends on who's labeling ESG friendly. The EU seems to change their rules on what is considered ESG friendly as well. Things like natural gas and nuclear go back and forth on that list. But it is true that blockchains like Bitcoin, and there are others as well, like Dogecoin and other proof of work chains, right? These are the chains that use mining in order to secure the network. They consume loads of energy. And as I mentioned, in the case of Bitcoin, it's well over 100 terawatts per year. I think that's as much energy as a Norway or Ireland. So when you look at it out of context in that way, it seems just crazy. But of course, if you think about how much money goes into producing, protecting, distributing money, cash, right? it's probably 10 times more. It has to be secured. It has to be delivered with men with guns, right? There's just a lot of things that go into not just the production of money, but ensuring it and storing it and all these things that nobody really think of. So for me, it's always a bit out of context, but I don't deny that it's a huge user of energy. And I think proof of stake is frankly just a better, more secure consensus mechanism.
It blew my mind to see actually how Ethereum managed to move from a proof of work to a proof of stake. That was amazing. You basically have a huge amount of money on the network, and then they changed the way to accept transactions. And that was flawless. It happened just within a few minutes. They did the switch and it was done, and it works without any problem.
Yeah, it was really just crazy. There were hundreds of billions in value on this network. I saw some great analogies. It's like flying a plane and swapping out the engine during flight, right? It probably was the most complex software upgrade ever made. It was really amazing. And the amount of trust that people have in the developers and the team is amazing because people had invested quite a bit in this network. There was a lot at stake and it worked absolutely flawlessly. A new proof of stake mechanism went online at a particular difficulty rate and kicked in. And all of a sudden at that time, the miners stopped mining the network. Yeah, it was super interesting.
And that was actually quite incredible because we both attended that, of course, virtually to see the merge, and there was quite a lot of enthusiasm in the video call. So that was very inspiring.
Yeah, that was definitely for geeks, but it was super interesting to see that happen. And it maybe was not as exciting as, some of us thought because nothing happened. It just worked.
And that was a good thing. That was the success criteria. Alex, we've seen a bit blockchain, a different Ethereum, Bitcoin. We got a high level understanding of tokens, NFTs, digital ownership. We briefly touched on the smart contracts. What about concrete use cases? What can we use these things concretely? And for some of our viewers and auditors, what can they in their companies use these new technologies for?
There's some really interesting things you can do. And there's more and more use cases you see popping up every day in the space. The amount of developer energy and passion in the space is unbelievable. I came from the tech space and I love working with developers, but in the blockchain specific space, you just see amazing creativity. There's a specific use case that I am particularly passionate about that which is about digital incentives. And I can spend a bit more time on that. The future of customer engagement is what's at stake here. It's huge. And we're likely to see a huge proliferation of different types of cases that are specific to different ways to engage with customers. NFTs are really one of the leading use cases now, but there are different things you can do with NFTs. And these days, I like to think of NFTs as a customer engagement tool, not really NFTs for the sake of selling NFTs. You can still do that. And I think that's going to sort of calm down. I think there'll always be that use case, but it's just not that interesting to me. The things you can do with NFTs, if you give them away to your customers, is amazing. So that's one. You can use NFTs as tickets because these things, they're unique. They have unique identifiers. So they can serve as a bearer bond, as a bearer asset. So whoever has the ticket in their wallet has access to certain privileges that go along with that ticket. So you could issue NFTs instead of issuing centralized ticketing. And there's all sorts of things that opens up for you as a customer. The other thing, you're starting to see fundraising. It used to be just fundraising with ICOs, initial coin offerings and coins. And that sort of passed fairly quickly. You still have some ICOs happening, but imagine if you had an NFT, you were a nonprofit or an NGO, and you created an NFT that had special financial features, such as royalty sharing. What you could do is you could issue a particular coin, and that NFT could be a piece of art, but it also doesn't have to be. You would make some money during the initial sale, but you also could continue receiving royalty revenue on secondary sales. It's just a great way for nonprofits and NGOs to raise funds and continue with a stream of annuity from secondary sales. Think of loyalty programs, things like your frequent flyer miles. That's an ideal one. That's pretty low-hanging fruit for the most part because people generally hate their loyalty programs just because you're so restricted in so many ways.
And you never really own them, actually. I've lost a lot of miles and then suddenly, oh, sorry, it's gone.
Exactly, and you've earned those. So as far as I'm concerned, if you have loyalty points, you should be able to give those to a friend to donate them easily and not have to go through the issuing entity for permission. And you should be able to do it instantly. You could do that with NFTs, both fungible and non-fungible tokens that would completely replace existing legacy loyalty programs.
So maybe we're touching on the point of centralized reward schemes, like from airlines, for example. Are they not good enough? That's maybe one of the reasons.
I always use mine to try and get upgrades when I could. But I just think there's so much more you can do. You can empower the customer and your users and your fans if you're giving them something that they actually own. Why not convert that into a tokenized program? Make your customers happy and make them actually own those particular, whether they're points in the form of coins or maybe there are other rewards that they get in the form of an NFT, so they can do what they want. They could even sell those on secondary markets.
I would like to dig into the psychology of this briefly, because look, my miles, they are mine. Why would these miles on the blockchain be any different?
They wouldn't be so different. They're not yours. That's the thing. If you don't use them, they can expire. There are certain rules that you have to abide by. So they are absolutely not yours. They are maintained for your use according to their rules. Now, it doesn't mean that you cannot have rules and logic with a blockchain-based loyalty program. You can do that. But the difference is that you do not own those points. And so you cannot take those, you cannot sell them, you cannot trade them. What if you had a friend or a family member you wanted to quickly give those points to so they could get a flight somewhere, right? Some programs allow you to do that, but oftentimes there's charges and costs. You have to contact a center. The blockchain allows you to do all of this completely autonomously, very, very quickly. One of the problems I think that companies face is that, for instance, frequent flyer programs become kind of a liability on their books. So people have these open points, they're accumulating and they have a value. They need to kind of get their customers to either spend them or lose them or do something with them. And oftentimes that's a big challenge, right? It's a liability financially for them. But if those are converted into digital assets, it just opens up. I mean, there's so many things you could do. You could offer to do buybacks. You could offer periods of time where you buy these things back, maybe at a reduced cost. There's just so many things you can do. So yeah, loyalty programs is one. I think it's another good fit. Decentralized finance is obviously was a big one over the last couple of years. We saw billions flow into that. They're like banking services, but they're blockchain native and they allow you to interact right out of your wallet without needing an intermediary. You have things like fashion in the metaverse. It's another use case. And you see big, well-known established companies now that are creating all sorts of interesting digital fashion for the metaverse and other things that can be used. Sometimes this stuff is being given away. Other times they're selling it as an NFT for revenue.
That convergence of the blockchain with the metaverse, I find very interesting because it opens a whole new world. I mean, the blockchain by itself was very interesting, but when you bring it to a 3D web, which will be very immersive over the next few years, this will be the parallel world with a parallel economy. You have not only the 3D world, but you also have the whole value in that world natively. So that can really open business cases that we have no idea about yet.
Most of the business cases and most of the use cases we don't know yet. We're going to see things pop up over the next 10 years that we hadn't even thought of. And I know you've been passionate about the metaverse for many years and you started your work combining learning and the metaverse. The next step is that financial plumbing natively to be able to power the metaverse and other platforms.
That's the thing that was really missing, actually. It's a huge add-on to the metaverse.
That's right. And lastly, I would say maybe things like digital identity. This is a big one too, because companies have not done a good job at protecting consumers' data.
At least we can say, yeah.
Yep. I mean, that's probably a nice way to put it. And frankly, in some cases, companies have just frankly abused that right and sort of productized their customers. And in a way, it's sort of by design. There's nothing for free, right? You get consumer services for free, and in return, your identity is being monetized. This is an area that blockchain can solve. There's still some challenges that are specific to being able to identify unique humans. I think these are things that will be worked through over the next few years. And you've already seen some new digital identity wallets that you can use. And you can decide which proofs and attestations you want to share as part of that. If that's the future. And lastly, I would say social, right? I've seen all sorts of problems with social platforms, Facebook, Twitter being censored. Whether you agree with them or not, politically is completely irrelevant. You have a handful, if not a single individual who has control and able to completely deplatform and remove people. Maybe it's because you disagree with them personally or with the company's vision, or maybe you've said something that they find damaging to the company. So the next sort of wave will be use cases for new social platforms that are decentralized.
That will probably be a bit cheaper than having to recreate your own social network for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's going to be amazing. I'm passionate about the digital rewards and incentives, but I think social is another one that I would really like to see take off.
Speaking about social, and we're nearing the end of our very interesting discussion. What about building an ecosystem around a brand? These digital rewards, incentives, how can they contribute to that and bring the brand to a higher level?
The digital rewards piece of the blockchain pie, if you will, is really the one that I'm quite interested in. Even when I was at Microsoft, I was really interested in trying to start implementing the stuff that I was learning. At the time, I just happened to have this amazing boss who gave me the chance, right, to build an NFT rewards program. And after the launch and the success, I was convinced that I needed to start focusing exclusively on this stuff.
Your project had a global reach and global success, right? It was something really unique at that time.
Yeah, it was surprising and a bit scary. It was 2.5, 3 years ago now, before anyone really knew what an NFT was. But it did. It went viral, it went global. It was quite crazy to see it work and to create assets that had no real value, but that people wanted. It was really quite a learning. We're really talking about tokenizing incentive mechanisms. It's about building new kinds of digital incentives. And maybe it's a good time to just have a bit of context when I'm talking to potential clients or companies that are interested in this and how they should think about this new kind of tech. I'm talking about NFTs as something that can be given to customers in exchange for things like engagement or attendance. So it isn't about creating a financial asset which can be sold. I mean, that is being done. There are people who are experts in that. That's not really my interest. And frankly, I think we've moved away from just simply selling NFTs for direct revenue. I think
Yes.
if you're clever and succeed at kind of gamifying your brand using NFTs for your fans or your community members, then you'll build better brand engagement and you give them real ownable assets. And you'll also gain valuable insights and more direct channels to your heavily engaged customers. So there's just a lot of things that this stuff can do. And imagine if you could directly issue one of these digital assets as an NFT to do things like generate better participation in something that you're doing, or increase attendance, or generate higher quality or specific types of engagement. The participants would receive the sort of proof of attendance or proof of engagement in the form of an NFT. And then because these are blockchain assets, you can then unlock certain privileges just for holding the token in their wallet.
That's great for learning. These are great incentives for learners to go to the next level, to maybe finalize their training before that date so that the management doesn't have to chase them all the time. We've talked with a lot of clients in the past few years. And 3 years ago, most companies didn't know about NFTs. Now, I think they're getting more familiar to it. But there's still a big question as to whether they should or could use the blockchain. It's not something that is obvious. That's why we did strategy work with some of them. It's not a mainstream yet, but it's coming.
That's right. It's similar to the internet. I mean, we don't really talk about the internet anymore, right? It's just there. We just talk about the apps and the services. We talk about our Netflix account. It's still weird because I think people don't necessarily understand how the internet works or how the protocols work. They don't really need to. They don't care because they have a mobile device and they have the apps. One of the learnings I had when we launched the program for the Azure team was that you could just create these kind of rare digital assets. And this is just not something you could do. Well, back then, NFT really wasn't a known world, even in the tech space. Even developers maybe had heard of it, but they didn't really know what it was. And I think today it's easy. You can go even further, right? For instance, you could allow your customers and your fans to take these NFTs that you're giving to them that already have special privileges. And you could allow them to place that in a special non-custodial vault, right? It's something we call staking. I didn't really want to talk about the kind of technical aspects of what that is, but essentially it's just a way to place your NFT temporarily. You still have control over it and you earn yield. And this yield can be in the form of a new token. I think it just opens up the world of, and I'm not talking about staking in the sense of yield farming and DeFi, people that are traders. I'm talking in the non-financial world, in the brand space where companies really want to engage deeper with customers and give real value and utility to these digital assets because they need to have utility. They need to be able to do something with them. Otherwise, they don't want to acquire more. They have special privileges for access. And on top of that, you could place them in a place out of your wallet that would allow you to earn a type of coin that you could then spend in a private or even public marketplace Now, all of a sudden, you're creating sort of loyalty programs within programs, and you're giving your users and your customers all sorts of new ways to engage with you. It's a cycle, right? You want them to be able to mint these NFTs and get them for doing provable acts. Then you give them the option to kind of stake these coins and earn even more coins so that they can be redeemed later for merchandise or swag. Those are the things that we've been working on to build some really interesting stuff. And yeah, it's quite powerful. They always maintain control of their assets. So it's not like the traditional airline points. Even if they place their NFT into a staking vault, they can pull it out at any time and we can never control it.
The possibilities are endless. We spoke about that many years ago. When the internet came out, nobody would have been able to predict that a Facebook would appear or Google at that time, because it was so far from any concepts we had. With Web3, we have everything to uncover the next few years.
Exactly.
One last thing, as we're nearing the end now of our discussion, we see a lot of things happening. Obviously, the blockchain has shaken a bit the world, banks, even insurance and other industries, companies in the fashion world moving to NFTs, to the metaverse at an incredible speed now. In the past few months, actually, the requests, the interest for this is drastically increasing. What about the legal and the regulatory aspects? Because the blockchain is challenging companies, governments, well-established institutions. So what does that look like in the EU, in the US?
That's the least fun, least interesting part, but it is a reality of what we're dealing with because this technology is quite game-changing. It is a little bit different. In the EU is getting ready to pass a new set of crypto laws called MiCA. I think it's Markets in Crypto Assets is what that stands for. And I think they're expected to go into effect in 2024. So yeah, we're not really sure what the final outcome is going to be since they're still negotiating these laws and they negotiate these things in secret. There's absolutely no transparency. There was a leaked document a couple of weeks ago. So we know that they're introducing the first kind of licensing regime for crypto wallets and exchanges. They also want to impose new minimum reserve requirements for stablecoins and other things. Some of the things they're proposing are probably not bad, but I think most of it is just unnecessary. And frankly, they're to kind of protect the financial industry. And we know also the scary one is that NFTs will also be included in that law. EU lawmakers are considering some NFTs or all NFTs fungible. And we talked about the difference between fungible and non-fungible because some NFTs are now being used as collateral and they have value and can be sold. And they're used to provide liquidity. They're considering these things securities. So I expect some needlessly complex rules, unfortunately, to be issued that everyone will interpret differently and that probably not many people will understand.
Hopefully, they will see the potential of Web3. You saw the article with the French Minister of Finance, Bruno Le Maire, who was saying that crypto, the blockchain, is the key for Europe's future. So hopefully, they will understand more this complex topic and make sure that they give entrepreneurs like us the possibility to really go ahead with these technologies and these business cases.
It depends. So there's lots of different entities, right? So the US also has kind of their own stuff. Their treasury is trying to protect the financial incumbents and they're sort of unofficially calling all token securities. So yeah, if you're selling digital assets, you want to be aware of that and probably initially exclude all US citizens and residents completely to be safe. And you also have the recent case last month of the US Treasury. They have the OFAC, which is the Office of Foreign Assets Control, sanctioning a smart contract. And this is the first time they've ever done that. They sanction individuals or countries. So they're sanctioning a piece of open source code. In fact, the Netherlands imprisoned one of the developers for this project as well. He's in jail without cause. And it's very, very scary to see this stuff happening. The project was called Tornado Cash. Essentially, they've made it illegal for US citizens and residents to send or receive any transactions. It's quite scary. You also have the Financial Stability Board. This is the FSB. This is a global framework that was just published. And they're basically recommending across the board AML KYC integration. AML KYC, for those that don't know, is used specifically in the banking space, but it's anti-money laundering, know your customer. So it's really getting all that personal data into the servers of banks and financial services organizations. They want to integrate the AML KYC into the entire ecosystem. So they're also pushing for all cryptocurrency to be subject to the same regulation as the existing financial system, which would kind of force crypto into becoming part of the existing financial system.
All right. It's been a good discussion. I'm sure there's a lot more we could talk about. And hopefully we'll do this over the next few weeks and months. That was a great chat. a lot of insights. Thank you very much for sharing your in-depth knowledge about the blockchain.
Yeah, thank you for a great discussion.
Take care.